Absolutely, let's do it. So thanks again, Raf, and everybody who's joined us this evening. We're continuing with our real estate series. This is episode number 7 with Barcelona Metropolitan and really inspired property experts. These guys really know what they're talking about when it comes to buying homes and advising people. They are experts, as the word would say, advising people in all stages and all phases of the buying process. And as you know, we would like to always help and add value to the international community of Barcelona, in particular, things that are very important to expats. And obviously, buying a home is near and dear to the hearts of everybody who seeks to have a proper life. And it's nothing like having a real somebody with real life experience and is day to day understanding the dynamics of the market, and more than anything else can help you avoid dumb mistakes, beginning mistakes, or even mistakes that even professionals could make if they're operating in a market that they are not familiar with. So we have Raf Jacobs with us tonight with Inspire. Raf, take it away. And remember, people, be very active with your questions. Raf is awesome at answering them, and he usually takes longer than what he ascribes time to because he really wants to be thorough and really add value to you. So don't be shy. Ask your questions.
Thanks for the introduction, Victor. Again, welcome everyone to this webinar. As Victor said, number 7, we received good feedback, from people on the previous webinars. We learned from that, and thanks for everyone who has joined in the past and shared their feedback. The purpose is really to make it as relevant as possible for you as potential buyers in the Spanish property market. My day job is to accompany buyers from start to end when they buy in Spain. So that's not what agencies do. We don't sell properties, we help people buy properties. And therefore we see hundreds of different situations, cases, challenges or difficulties sometimes throughout the processes in different parts of Spain. That's very useful for us when we evaluate properties, when we advise our clients. So I'm going to bring a lot of examples to this webinar, and there is more theory, there is more documents, articles, etc. I will refer to. So if you want to dive deeper into certain topics, you can find them online as well. You have a Q&A button somewhere at the bottom of your screen, I think. Please use that to raise your questions. We foresee time at the end of this webinar for answering all of your questions. We will write. Let's write, Jeff. Let's write a message briefly in the Q&A chat box so people see a message pop up. They find the chat box. You use that, please, for your questions. And I think that don't be shy. Myself, for those of you, I see quite some familiar names here, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm originally from Belgium, close to Brussels, living here since 20 years this year in Spain. And I come from a corporate background. And at some point, I basically realized that when people buy a property, when they make a big investment, when they put their savings into acquisition, maybe take a mortgage, they forget a lot of very crucial steps in that process, and they often trust the wrong people or just forget to apply certain checks during the process, and things can easily go wrong in Spain. I'm going to talk about that a bit later as well. And that's why we created Inspire at some point. I also teach at University in Barcelona. They followed us from the Real Estate Executive Master Program. They followed us for 2 years or so, and they said, like, hey, Inspire, please come explain to our senior students, so that's people from family offices, from agencies, lawyers, architects, and so on that are in the industry, that please come and explain us what is important to a buyer. How do you accompany a buyer? Because in the whole sector, the whole real estate sector in Spain is built around agencies that sell properties. And there's not many people who understand why buying is so important, what checks to perform, etc. So that's what we do. That's what I teach there as well. Any questions? You got my email address at the bottom. You got our blog there where you find more content. Reach out to us. This webinar, I try and give examples, but I also need to be somehow general. Everyone's situation is specific, individual. So just write me, tell me what your plans are. Hey, I've got 70,000 euro. I'm thinking of buying a property on the Costa Blanca. I've seen it. I think it's good, but I'm not really sure if the price is okay, if the contract is okay. The agency is pushing me. What do you think? The first session, the first consultation is for free. Take 20, 30 minutes with you in a Zoom call. I give you my opinion. That's my commitment. You take some time to join us, and I'll make my commitment to share more or my opinion with you if you want to, of course. This webinar is part of a series, and this is episode number 7, but you find the previous ones on our blog about the market predictions, about people who are thinking from renting to owning a property. There was last month in February, but there is more as well. There's webinars on mortgages, etc. on the blog. Feel free to look at them, to watch them. And when you might have seen, I quite often speak in the media. They ask for my opinion on the property market. The good thing and the big benefit in my role is that I can speak openly. I'm not bound to certain properties. I'm not bound to sellers of properties. I can give my opinion on the market as an economist. I can, based on day-to-day experience. People don't always like it, but I don't have to defend the sector, the sellers, etc. It's just about buying the best property. So you find that, but overall, the messages you find in the media today about the property market in Spain is that it's an attractive market, and that's because of Corona. We can talk a bit in more detail later. There's good opportunities to buy at a lower price, to buy a property which in the past was simply impossible to. It was out of reach, out of budget. There's great opportunities to finance your purchase if you want to through a mortgage in Spain or in your home country. But equally, when speaking with La Vanguardia recently, which is one of the largest, the most read Spanish newspaper, they also said like proper advice is more important than ever, because in a crisis, in an economic crisis, some people become desperate and might do things that they shouldn't be doing to try and sell property. So you could also be very careful there. That's our role. Our role is to make sure that you find better properties, that you pay less for them, and that we can de-risk every step in the process. So before you sign, before you pay, that you're sure it's the right decision. But not making mistakes also means selecting the right property. If you've seen 5, which is the best one? That's where a lot of people doubt, and therefore sometimes lose a property or never buy a property. All right, or lose the momentum. That's we are there with you. We visit properties. That's our day-to-day job. No, I'm gonna move on here. So to give you an idea, these are people. Most of these people were on previous webinars with Metropolitan and Inspire, and I thought we just put a few faces up, and they're happy faces, they're smiling people. They contacted us afterwards, they shared their story, and in the meanwhile, they've all bought their property, all successfully bought their property. It's not all the buyers, but it's a selection which you put on slides. What does it mean? There's people from all types of budgets. Typically, our customers start with purchasing budgets around 150,000. That's like the lower entry entry level of properties. There is no upper level. Some people spend crazy amounts, more than $1 million or more on properties, but the majority is, as you could probably also see from pictures, young people who buy, families who buy properties, people who buy a second residence in Spain, people who change from renting to owning. So there's people that take a mortgage, people who don't take a mortgage, but a lot of people do actually today. And regarding the entry budget, that differs quite a lot depending on the places in Spain. So certain areas are significantly cheaper. So there is parts of Spain where you can find very good houses or apartments for 120,000 euro, but you can't find it on the Costa Brava. You can't find it in Marbella or in Barcelona or in Malaga, right? But you can find it in some, so entry level. I give some indicative figures here, all right? So all their stories are on the YouTube channel, and we can put a link to that channel in the chat function here, because they tell us. We ask them the question when they sign at the notary, say, people that are in your position, that are today in a position you were 4, 5, 6 months ago, what would you like to tell them? What did you learn during the journey? That's what you can find here. So enough about who we are, what we do, and where the experience come from. Make this a bit interactive. Who are you? Just this helps me a lot. We're gonna show a message, a pop-up on your screen. Knowing who you are helps me to pick certain examples or other examples. So if you just indicate what is your current situation today, are you living abroad and thinking of buying a home or a second home, an investment in Spain, or you already live in Spain, you are in Spain, and you're thinking of a place to buy and live, or maybe an investment. Okay, so you should see a message on your screen now. So it's a good mix. It's a mix here. If someone else wants to vote, yeah, good. I see some more votes coming in. So it's a mix. There's people living abroad. There's people already in Spain. There's people who want to invest first to buy. So, okay, excellent. Thanks for that. And I think there was a second question. For those of you who have been, I don't know, if you have been looking already at properties, if you've been searching online, if you've been maybe visiting properties, if you've been talking to agencies, you've asked them for information about certain properties, how is your experience during that process? In your relationship with the agencies, how would you describe that? So from fantastic, can't be better, through yeah, average or disappointing or really bad. Or if you've not searched for properties, you can just say I no opinion. Or so it's not that you don't have to have bought a property already. It's more like when you engage, when you interact with agencies, right? Because you might have found that this is quite different from how things go in your home country. That's why we ask this question, to understand if you've been, if you're, okay. Good. Then, and you might recognize some of these things here. We did a survey recently and a little bit of research. And we asked international buyers what their main concerns are when it comes to buying a property in Spain. And interestingly, apologies, I'm organizing my screen here. Apologies. So you see, there's 5 key worries, and if you have these concerns, then this and other webinars might be very useful for you. So first of all, of course, people say they're worried to overpay for their property in Spain, and that's to some extent because the lack of reference points. You know prices in your home country, or if you live in Spain, you know prices maybe in the area where you live, but it's hard to know if an agency asks 340,000 for a property. Is that good? Is that great? Should you quickly sign up for it, or is a property worth 280 or 300? So that's a major concern for many buyers. Second main concern is making mistakes. You're in Spain. You're maybe alone here. You don't have the network, so making mistakes, forgetting something, forgetting to check a document, and that can result in problems with the property later. Technical problems, legal problems, debt on the property, all things that frequently happen way too often in Spain. But interestingly enough, buyers also indicate that they're confused by the agencies. They say there seem to be, in some parts of Spain, there seem to be more agencies than properties. and that is reality. On every corner of a street, in at least in more or less in a vivid area of town or village, you find a realtor, an agent selling properties. And the final concern is the financials. How do I pay for this? Do I take a mortgage? Yes or no? When do I need the money to be available in Spain? All things that are understandable, and it's easy to pay too much. Certainly if you come as a foreign buyer, it's very easy to make mistakes. Not spotting property problems is what happens a lot. How do you select the right agency and how you sort out your financials? That's topics we want to give answers to. And so let's proceed. So when you think of buying, there's a few things that I would like you to know about the property market, because there is a big momentum. There's a lot of wind in the sails of the property market, specifically for foreign buyers this year. It's because of the economic slowdown. It's because of COVID. It's because there is less people traveling. It's because there's less locals that's going to buy a property this year. It is because the banks are a bit more selective in terms of who they finance, yes or no. But the result is that property prices are lower today than a year ago, and they probably lower today than in a year from now. We don't know exactly when prices will pick up again, but we know there's a temporary window, temporary slot of opportunities, lower prices on the market, which means that you can buy properties you couldn't afford before, which means that you can negotiate harder and pay less for the same property, or maybe move to a nicer area or afford that little balcony or the terrace or the view. Secondly, mortgages in Spain are cheaper than ever before, certainly if you compare with the US, because I think there's on this webinar there's typically quite some people from the US. Historic low interest rates. You can lock in interest rates today for anything between 1.25 and 2.3, 2.2% fix over 20, 30 years. That's amazing. It encourages demand. So we're in a clear buyer's market, and we see people switching from renting to buying because it makes more sense. We see people buying now this second residence, this dream place. We see people moving away from the city as well. People living in, for instance, Barcelona, going and buy properties on the Costa Brava, in Tamarillo, in Tossa, in Bejur, or in Sitges or Villanova. So well connected still, but not in the city. That's important things to keep in mind. So this is temporary. I would suggest, if you want to know a bit more, look at our blog. There's an article, Real Estate Trends for 2021. And I talk a bit more about what it actually means, how you should act as a buyer. Because one conclusion is, once travel will open up again, once travel bans will be lifted, and vaccination will be having its effect, a lot of people will travel to Spain. A lot of people will start buying properties, and they will be less rational than they should be. They will overpay for properties. They will want to secure certain properties, some emotional decisions, and therefore you should buy before everyone else is back on the market, in my opinion. Another question before we talk further about the market. We're going to launch another question on your screen, or two questions, I think, and it should come now. So when you buy, the question is the following: if you buy a house in Spain with an agency, which is how you typically buy a property, who is the customer of that agency? So typically you search online, you find properties, you click on a link, you're directed to a agency. Right? That agency provides you then that is then giving you information, making appointments, organizing viewings. So who's the client? Is it you as a buyer? Is it the seller? Or are you both customers of that realtor? This is a recurring question. We've asked this in several webinars, and it's very interesting. Okay. I see a lot of people voting, choosing the right answer. That's encouraging. So maybe it's people who have been before on the webinars, who have been reading some articles. The answer is, what has voted here, there's only one client of the agency. It's the owner. It's a seller. In other countries, I know agencies intermediate. The buyer can be a client as well. It's not the case in Spain. Even if an agency charges you a fee as a buyer, because some agencies do that in Spain, it is like Tecnocasa, etc. They charge 2-3% to buyers. You're not the customer. They defend the interests of the seller. That's very important. That's why we have positioned ourselves on the buyer side, not on the seller side. And we act as a buffer in between you and the agency. The second question coming up, and this comes from a story that happened last Friday, a real life story. I talk about it later. When you go to notary so closing, notary means you pay the final amount to the seller. It also means you get the keys, transfer of ownership. The seller wants to be sure that when he gives you the keys, he will have all the money, of course, from the purchase, which is logic, you would say. So the Spanish bank, because you need a Spanish bank account, your Spanish bank might ask you to transfer some or all of the funds to the seller a few days in advance of going to a notary, so that the seller has the funds in his account. How much should you transfer? The question is cut off, I see, but how much should you transfer at that point? So let's say on Friday this week, you go to the notary for closing, and then today or tomorrow, the bank will ask you or might ask you this question: how much should you pay? 10% of the purchase price, 10% of the purchase price minus what you paid already, because you had to pay the deposits when you sign arras or earnest money. The full remaining amount, or do you think it depends? Okay, wait a bit, because some people are thinking about this. It's an important question. If you've not voted, have a look please at your screen on your phone, on your laptop. Okay, so we don't need to wait. So there we go. I'm going to come back to this question in a minute, and if I forget, then Jeff, please remind me. So you're the buyer. There's 5 things that are absolutely vital to know about the Spanish property market. Firstly is, in Spain, anyone can sell properties. It's not like the US, it's not like in France, it's not like Germany or Belgium or Netherlands, where you need training, you need a license, or you might need a license, you need to upgrade your knowledge every X number of years. In Spain, not. No or very poor qualification is required. It's a non-regulated market. And anyone can enter the market, because there's no, so all of you, if you live in Spain already, every one of you living in Spain can start tomorrow a real estate agency, and you can start selling properties. There is plenty of examples in Spain where at a bakery, at a hairdresser, you see signs where properties are advertised and they sell. You can do it. That's one thing. So the level of professionalism is sometimes good, but in most cases is very disappointing. Secondly, the people who sell, they've got no liability. They're not responsible for what they're selling. Again, very different from your home country, and number 1 and number 2 source of mistakes made by international buyers. The agency is not obliged to inform you of things that might not be okay with a property. Thirdly, the notary has a very limited role. You see the notary only in the last 1-2 hours of a 3, 4, 5, 6 months journey. He doesn't have to do the due diligence on notary. He doesn't have to control if everything is okay. You've got to do it yourself. That's why the lawyer is an important part of the process. At the same time, properties sell quickly if they're good, so you need quick decisions, but there is no transparency of information about the properties. It's very difficult to access this information. And then there's a risk, number 5, we see, and it's because of the recession today, a lot of properties that are not good, problematic properties, but they present them as bargains. And they can do so because they're not liable. They don't have to tell you about defects or issues. And as fast as they find someone who puts a signature on paper to buy the property, the problem becomes a buyer's problem. So this is very, very important to keep in mind. I'm going to give you a few examples here, but in an illustration, I took an example of Barcelona, and the illustration is about how many agencies there are, or and it's a result of there is no entry barriers, no qualification required. So this is a map of the center of part of the center of Barcelona. Every red dot is a realtor. All right, so this is amazing, and this is like 100-meter, one block in the center. It's like about 30-second walk. All right, or a few minutes walk around the block. So that's probably very different from your home country, and you might not have realized it. But the same happens on the coast, in touristic cities, in cities where people buy second residences. So you got to be very careful who you work with. If you're thinking of buying before summer, because that's a big question here, what you need to do. So you need to, it's very important you understand the differences and how the market works or doesn't work. Okay, so the agency doesn't care about you as the buyer. Keep that in mind. And examples. Last week, no, this week, sorry, yesterday, Aurora, and she lives in Spain. She's Italian originally. She signed her earnest money agreement. In Spain, it's called an arras contract, a commitment contract, compromis d'achat in French, for the property. Now, we found the property a month ago, and the seller said, well, it's okay, there's no issues with it, and etc., etc., etc. We managed to negotiate a price from 190,000 down to 169, so 21,000 off the price. But we had one specific doubt. We had one specific doubt about the quality of the cement used to construct a building in the 80s, because there is parts of Spain where they call it aluminosis, where there is a structural defect on properties. And a long story short, cement turns into sand, right? That explanation, I used to visualize it. It's not exactly that, but it's a structural defect. So instead of, and the agency didn't say anything about that. So what do? Run a test. Take technical samples by an architect, analyze them in the laboratory. It costs a few €100. It's worth doing it, but then you're certain about the outcome. Our case is for clients, for Ryan and Justina, and if you want to, they signed last Friday the notary. They've made their story in a 2-minute video. At the end, if you want to, I can show it to you. They saw a house on the Costa Brava, north of Spain. They asked the seller, can we get a tourist license for this house? Because you might want to rent it out at some point. He said, yeah, it's no problem, we can get that, and you just go to the city hall. It's not that easy. There's restrictions on these type of licenses. So when we talk to the town hall, city council, they said, well, at the moment you can't get any license anymore, and end of March we will open up the process again, so you can request licenses, but there's only 37 licenses for the entire village. That's a totally different answer than saying, don't worry, this property can have a license, you can buy it. That's one of the things you've got to check. The same happened with a property also at the coast, a beautiful house with sea view. And the buyers wanted to know if they could build a swimming pool in the garden. It's a big garden, a sufficient space, and they would have to remove some trees and could build a swimming pool there. So the seller says, even on email, no problem, you can build a swimming pool there, and so even with that size of pool. We talk to the city council and they say, there's 2 problems. You can't cut so many trees, and 2, it's not allowed to build a swimming pool in that house. Local legislation. That's things, if you buy that property and you find out afterwards, or after having paid 10%, that you can't build that pool, then your dream starts or becomes a nightmare, of course. We had the case last week where a buyer asked the bank, can you finance a property of, it was around 160,000 euro purchase price. The bank said, yeah, we can give you 151,000. So a very large loan to value percentage, unusually large. I talk to the bank, I investigate, and we figure out that they just try to create hooks to catch you as a potential customer, and they know that once you further down the process and once you've committed with the seller to buy a property, you won't have time enough to speak to other banks. So again, that's things that happened in Spain. You've got to build in time for such checks during the process, and you got to make sure that you know or you have the experts with you to perform these checks. If you want to buy before summer, there's a process to go through. There's different steps here that are that apologies that I couldn't see my screen. Um, the steps are relatively standard. There's an entire webinar on the process alone, on the buying process, step by step. I explain it. It's on our blog. There's also an article about it where it's written down. But basically, your end goal is that you become the owner. If you got the keys in your hand, a title of ownership, that is the notary. That is here at the end. Now, you've got to start several months before that. And I made an example here. If you want to buy in July, so if you want to be an owner, access your property in July, as an example, you should start searching in March. So now basically, this is again slightly generalized. This is indicative, but it can go faster, but it can also go slower. At the same time, if you want to buy by the end of the year, by December, you should start to search the market between now and latest September. Um, that's an indicative timeline. Why is that? So first of all, a lot of people, and maybe some of you have done already, the first thing people do is they get online and they start searching for properties. And then they see loads of different properties, different values, different areas, different locations, and they start to doubt. They're not really sure. It's hard to compare. Problem is you got to start one step earlier with a proper plan, a proper feasibility assessment. Can I buy a property in Spain? What type of property can I buy? What can I afford? Which areas match my lifestyle? Which areas, in terms of price levels, come into play, given my situation? How am I going to search, etc. That is very important. How I'm going to pay this actually for the property as well. The financial part. Do I pay cash? Where is my money? Is it in the US, in the UK, in Germany, in Italy? Is it in Spain already? How much do I need as a down payment? That initial phase here, and that's why I excluded this from the search. It can take a week, 2 weeks. The feasibility itself, when we do our workshop with the customers, is normally in a few days we can give you a proper answer. If you need a mortgage from a bank, that will then add some time, and you're quickly talking about a week, 2 weeks to get that feasibility done. And then you start searching, because then you know exactly where to search. Targeted, focused searching. Which area, which type of property, how to put my filters, what is the really maximum budget. Also, what if I find a property that needs a renovation? I love the property, I love the location, but the kitchen is ugly. I hate it. You drop the property because of the kitchen, because you can change the kitchen. You can't change location, you can't change the views, but you can change the kitchen. But so you should pay less for the property, but you need a buffer, financial buffer, to pay for the renovations. So all these numbers, they need to be done up front, because otherwise you will go and start visiting properties, and you won't be comfortable taking a decision to buy or to say no to a property, because you miss elements to take an informed decision. When people that we accompany in the search, we are with them, we visit the property with them, and of course we help take these decisions quicker. Once you search, so searching is typically online, or if you live here, you can walk around and look at agencies. You visit properties, you start to shortlist them. We use tools, standard models, simple models, but that help a lot to document what you see, to analyze it, to compare pros and cons between different properties. And once you like one property, then you've got to start a buying process. Buying process is not contracting, it's not negotiating, it's not making a reservation, it's due diligence. That means checking everything on the property. And that takes easily 1-2 weeks, depends on how much information is available. That's a crucial part. That's where the lawyer comes into play, where the architect comes into play. We need technical inspection on the property. We use all that information. So how is the property technically? Is there any debt on the property? What about the sellers? Is there an inheritance, a mortgage? Do they owe taxes? Have they unpaid bills? What about the community? If the property is in the community, what about the community costs and so on? All these things are checked, and then we negotiate. You don't commit to a price before you check everything, because often what we find during the due diligence part are elements that actually reduce the value of the property, and that are levers that we can use to negotiate harder, to negotiate better prices. And then once the negotiation is done, then we reserve the property. You should take it off market. We continue some checks on it. You commit really to buying it, earnest money or others, and then you go to notary. So that time frame, if you want to buy by July, starting in March, meaning March, April, you're searching, visiting, shortlisting. And imagine you find something, you can secure a property in beginning of May, and you still need to do some of this due diligence here and this earnest money, May, and then June, July. Between earnest money and notary is at least 1 month, but for foreign buyers, it's often 2 months as well in this last step here. So this is faster often than this part here. And it's just waiting time. It's getting the financials organized, it's getting your bank account sorted, it's getting maybe a mortgage sorted. The seller needs to leave the house. So that's an, an, an overview of where you should start. Again, this can go faster. We've seen cases where people come to us and they say, look, I found this property. I like this apartment. I'm fine with the asking price. We've looked at it. Can you help us buy it? So then we jump in right here at the due diligence part, due diligence negotiation and the contracts. So the lawyer, the architect, and so on, the negotiation parts. But there's equally people that come to us and they say, I still need to start searching, but I really know what I want. And if they really know what they want, we can help them search, or they can search themselves, depends on the model. And it can go faster or slower. You don't know. But when we search, it goes typically a lot faster. So there's different things that might impact this initial stage here as well. One of the big criteria that impacts timing here in the search, the visiting, and the shortlisting phase is probably how well you're prepared and how do you take decisions. Some people are very quick at they see a few properties and say that's it, and they take a decision. Other people doubt a lot. We see buyers now who buy a property based on video viewings because they can't travel here. They can't travel from London to Barcelona at the moment, or from the US to Barcelona, or to Malaga. Looking at properties close to Murcia or Costa Blanca as well. So we are there on site. We show you then the property through video meetings, but we show you what we want you to see, not what the seller wants to show you. Of course not. So we zoom in on all the good and the bad things of the property. That's timing wise. So that's about when to start. When you know when, the next question is then, so how do I do this? What is how to get started? And I love this visual here, and I call it the buyer equalizer. It's like when you produce music. You can play with the different buttons. You can push them up, lower them, etc. But you need to come to a realistic, to a good balance between these parameters, between the price of the property, the purchase price, between the property features. So how beautiful, how big, how modern, etc. How many bedrooms, terrace, balcony, yes or no, the property features, and the location. Close to the sea, more inland, in the very center of a city, or in a quieter street, in a pedestrian street. That's location. You can't have everything because typically the budget is a given. Is a given parameter. It's your own savings plus maybe the mortgage from a bank, but that's typically a fairly hard number. I can buy up to 200k. I can buy up to 600,000 euro, up to a million, whatever the number is in your situation. But that's typically a given. And then you need to play because if you want more property features, you want a larger property, you want that extra terrace, you want a terrace with a view, you want it to be ready to move in, so no works required, then it might not exist at that certain location. Then you can only get that property if you go lower on location, meaning you go a bit further away from the center, a bit further away from the sea, etc. Equally, if you go higher up in location and your budget is a given, you might have to lower your expectations on the property feature. So more prime location, the more prime location, maybe the smaller the apartment, less property features. That is what we do in these initial workshops. Be realistic about it, because otherwise we see people have been searching for some people for 2 years. Someone recently came to us and said, I've seen 50, I think 56 properties, they said, a young couple in their 30s. More than 50 properties they visited. They didn't like any property. And then we started, and this was the initial workshop, and there was an eye opener for them because I said, yeah, now we know why we didn't found it. And then a question of, I think, a month and a half or so later, they knew we have found the property. They found it in that case and was secured, and they bought it. So these questions might be familiar to you, and if they're not, think about them. Oblige yourself to think about how you will finance it, which areas, what is possible, otherwise it's not realistic. You might lose time. It will become potentially considerable frustrating towards the end of your or during your journey. Also here, the market isn't helping to get to that realistic target definition, because the sellers, they will also say the property is great and there's no problems with it. So you might get a wrong impression of what the market is. We had a case last week where a couple, they are I think in their 60s, they're relocating to Spain, to the south of Spain, and saw beautiful finca with land around it, and just beautiful. And the seller said it's all good, and it's everything is okay. Then we go. Our architect goes together with the buyers to see the property. That was last Thursday, somewhere close to Granada, and then the architect figured out that actually there is a plan approved to build a road right next to the fence of the garden or the land, a long piece of land. So let's say 100 meters away from your terrace. We don't know if they will build the road, but the plan is approved. And the sellers didn't mention it, and they don't have to mention it. Or what you find as well is that you reserve a property, you pay 2, 3, 5,000 euros to reserve it, and the agency doesn't take it off the market. And why do they do that? They shouldn't do that, but they do it because they try to find a buyer who wants to pay a bit more than you, and then they tell you, sorry, you got someone else, and then an auction starts. Shouldn't do it. You need to protect yourself for that, or be able to get your money back if that happens. Okay. So I mentioned some of these here already. So when you get started, what is possible? My possibilities, not in general. Okay. Talk to the bank, very important, early on, in week 1. If you're thinking of buying, drop me an email. We'll have this discussion together for the first 2 topics. The result is then that those expectations that you're aligned, realistic. Know how to search. Today we had a workshop, a kickoff workshop with buyers from the US who want to relocate to Spain, and there we talked about how to search better, what to take into account, what factors to look at when you see properties. It makes you come across more professional when you search as well, and should help you to get to your dream property faster and without much frustration. Maybe also look at properties together with our customers in these workshops, or when you start searching. So you're not alone when you take a decision. And every buyer asks the same question: what do you think of it? Do you think it's good, or do you think I should continue searching and find something better? And because we don't sell it, we can give our honest opinion. Say it's overpriced, or it's technically not good, or there is problems with the urban planning. I wouldn't. It's too risky, or they can build a building in front, or whatever. Or yes, it's great, and we can negotiate because they want to sell quickly. It's inheritance with 5 brothers, and they want the money. They're happy to negotiate. So that's that part. So that's how to get started. We talked about a lot of topics, and there's a lot of topics important to you if you want to buy in the next few months in Spain, or certainly before summer. This is topics that I think you might want to look at, that might inspire you in this early stage of your search. Uh, One is the steps in the buying process. Again, there's an article and a webinar about it. The article is a few minutes read. Uh, what's the market doing in Spain, and when should you buy, etc. Again, article and a webinar. So article is easy to read. The webinar is typically about an hour, sometimes a bit more with the questions involved. There's loads of stories from other buyers, the people from the pictures that I showed you in the beginning. Listen to them. It's very inspiring what they've gone through, what they've learned, and what they want to share with new potential buyers on the market. If you need a mortgage in Spain, look at the webinar. It's episode 3. You know, if you're renting today and you want to own a property, there's another webinar specifically on that topic. There's a lot of things to financial and so on to take into account. The property prices. Why don't you see the big discounts on the platforms? But why can you negotiate them? That's what I explain in this article here. Uh, the same article about specifically about holiday homes. If you're thinking of buying, for instance, at the Spanish costas on the coast, a house, an apartment, have a look at this. We will send this to you in an email at the end of the webinar, so you have these for your reference. We're nearly at the top of the hour. I'm quickly cross-checking some topics I wanted to mention with you, or share with you. I think we can, or maybe just in another few minutes, other examples of things that happen and that illustrate what we've discussed so far. Is a lawyer enough? You need a lawyer in Spain. Is it enough? We have people that come to us and say, and this happens more than in the past. I don't know why. We made a reservation. We signed a document. We paid a certain amount, a few €1,000, and we want to get out of it. We figured out something is not okay, and can we get the money back? Agencies make it complicated. And last week as well, that agency said, like, you can't get it back. We're negotiating now. I think we'll get something back of the amount that the buyers paid before we knew them. Examples can happen. A very typical example: you search for properties online, you see a pearl, you say, wow, beautiful, and at a very cheap price. You contact the agency, you never get a response. Fake properties. They're there as a hook to get people to their websites and hopefully sell them other properties. There's properties that have been sold maybe a year ago. Happens a lot in the market in Spain. Recently as well, a buyer said, no, we don't need a lawyer, we don't need the lawyer service. We have a lawyer already. The agency said, there was on the Costa Blanca, the agency said they can recommend us 2 or 3 lawyers and we can choose one and they will take care of it. So think about that based on what we've talked about today. The agency, who does the agency work for? For your counterparty, for the seller. So your counterparty is recommending you a lawyer. Would you do that? So happens a lot, certainly for international buyers and certainly on the coasts. So never do that, because it won't be, the lawyer will be paid partially by the agency or by the seller. If you have a lawyer who says he can review all your documents for 1,500 or for 2,000 euro, it can't be true. I can put my hand in the fire for this. A proper lawyer cannot do that. So that he is getting money from somewhere else then. Otherwise, it's just not. He can't take that responsibility and do that work for those fees. So be mindful of that. Or another example, we with Ryan and Justina, and again, there's some people. If you want, I can show you the video later. They saw property, and the agencies are like, no, it's you need somewhere. It needs a lot of renovation, but you can do it. And sometimes agencies say we have a proposal already from a building company. The owner asked for a proposal, and look, it's going to be 60,000 euros, and that's it. Then you think, okay, purchase price plus 60,000. Okay, 99% sure the 60,000 is undervalued on purpose. On purpose. They leave key elements of the renovation works out so that you buy the property, first of all, and then secondly, that you go with a builder because you think they are cheap, but then after 2 weeks in the process, then they come with extra costs, unforeseen costs. Costs that are not unforeseen, they could have been foreseen perfectly. They didn't tell it. That's why we visit properties with an architect before we negotiate, before we would allow you to sign and to pay for it. That's very, very important. I would like to open this up for questions, I think. And I will go and let me. So as I go and look at the Q&A chat box here, what you can do next. If you're serious about buying and you don't want to make mistakes and don't pay too much, etc., all the things that we've talked about. If you have seen a property already, or you're thinking of buying and still need to start searching, or you just started searching, drop us an email at Raf@Inspire Apartments. I sent you a Zoom invite, and we have a free first session. I give you my opinion. If you just want to stay informed, follow us. You can register for the series, for the webinars, read the articles. It's all free content. We don't believe in publicity. I believe in investing my time in sharing my knowledge, sharing examples, real life stories with all of you, so that you know that when we help you, how we help you, and how much we know about the market. So let's see what we received in terms of questions. This is always an exciting moment. I see a question from Melanie. You say, do you mean Arras? There are some exceptions to this, no? So I don't know anymore in what context you asked this question, Melanie, but if you clarify, I will come back to it now.
I think you already answered it. It's about that the buyer doesn't have any liability. I think, to my knowledge, the Arras was the 10%, putting down with the bank, which, by the way, you didn't answer yet, about what we should do if the bank asked us to transfer some money.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you meant the Arras, because that's 10% typically, or if that was something else you were referring to. And the other one is more about, I think the seller does have some liability. For example, if they know that there is a luminosis and they don't say it, or if they know that the building is marked for urban changes, like the block could be torn down or something, and they don't share it, I think they can be taken to court and the purchase can be undone, no?
So making a purchase undone is extremely difficult, You can take a seller to court, of course you can, because indeed, if there is like hidden defects and you didn't tell you about it, or there's obvious things that you can claim responsibility. But the problem is it's after you're the owner already, it's after you have paid everything, and you're in a negative cycle already, because you have problems with a property you thought was going to be a dream property. Now, the best way to approach this is to do all the checks and double checks and anticipate things, because if you find them out later, it's too late and it's very difficult to sort them out. You're gone for 2 years for sure with lawyers, and if you go to court, it means in the meanwhile, if you can't sell the property, you can't maybe rent out the property, and maybe you can't live there. So That's why this anticipation phase is so important in this before you sign an ARAS contract.
I totally
And
agree.
I will come back to the question now about the banks. So let me reframe. The question was, when you go to a notary, you become the owner, you get the keys. The bank or the seller wants to get certainty to have the money in his bank account. And this was a real example. Last week it happened. And the buyer was signing last week, Friday, the 12th. And the bank asked on Tuesday, I think it was, to transfer around 50,000 euros into the seller's account, which was, by the way, a non-Spanish account. So not a Spanish IBAN account outside of Spain. Never do it. Never, ever. Okay. This was the bank that the buyers had chosen as a trusted bank for financing the purchase. I got a major discussion with the banks. I'm not going to share a discussion, but you can imagine how angry we were. So the bank asked them to make that payment. And it just said, just transfer the 50,000 euro to the seller's account in another country, because then it will be there on Friday. If you do that, you have zero guarantee. You get nothing in exchange. If the seller doesn't turn up at the notary, how do you get your money back? Yeah, legally, you can take a lawyer. It can be very painful, right? There's no document. The bank didn't even propose a document to be signed to document that you pay 50,000 as part of the purchase price. So practices that surprised me massively last week with a big Spanish bank. So the answer is you don't pay anything without a proper document. So when do you pay? You'd make 3 payments typically. One, when you reserve the property, and you do that with a reservation contract. That is when you make an offer, you submit the offer, and you pay 2,000 or up to 1% of the purchase price, typically maximum, sometimes a bit more with new developments, but that's the initial payment, a small amount. Okay. You got to make sure that this contract allows you to step out of it if you figure out afterwards something is not okay. Something most people don't do, and then you can't get that reservation back if you decide not to buy. Second milestone is due diligence has been done. The lawyer gives all the green lights. Our architect says it's okay. We've negotiated the price. The contracts are ready, and you and the seller both sign a commitment contract, an ARAS contract, earnest money agreement contract. That is milestone 2. You pay typically 10% of the purchase price at that stage. Second milestone. With a proper contract, everything documented. And the third milestone, the 90% that's remaining of the purchase price, you pay at the notary, but not a day before, not a week before. And there's different ways to pay that. There's different ways to give security to the seller that the funds will be in his bank account or will be covered by the bank, guaranteed by the bank of the buyer, but never send money without outside of these milestones. Exception is new developments. There is more payments typically, but again, always with a proper contract, not just payments. Okay. So I think I can't remember exactly the result of the poll, but I think a lot of people said 10% or 10% minus what you paid already. So be careful with that. Okay. More questions. Do you help people find properties through auctions, through subastas? I'm not a big fan of auctions and the subastas for properties because first of all, it's a pirate world, it's a mafia style world. Secondly, the properties that were the auctions, they started after the previous crisis, 2008 crisis started. Now we are 2021. The good properties are gone. There might be some deals in there, but if it's really good, the bank's director or the brother of the bank's director or his nephew will be before you, and you will have access to properties that have not been bought by those people. We do have contacts in the sector. It's problematic. I'm not a big fan of it, but yes, we can help people buy such properties. What does the bank ask for to approve mortgage? Typically, does the bank want a mortgage to be less than 30% of monthly income? And if income based on commission, is that an issue for the banks? Okay, so key basic principles to qualify for mortgage in Spain is a minimum amount of savings. As of we're doing a deal now, and we managed to get, so he will be buying a property around 180,000. Down payment required 35,000 euros. It's not much, huh? But typically minimum 50,000 euros is required. So some savings. 2, stable income, stable recurring income. That means that can be from it can be commission based. Commission based is probably not stable recurring, but if it's sufficient, then you, and if 1 month is a bit more, another month, but in general it averages out well, which you can see in your last tax returns, for instance, then that shouldn't be an issue. So savings, recurring income, and a work contract. Work contract, or if you work as a freelance, a proof of sufficiently stable business so that the bank can afford the risk. The percentage they finance is it's not standard. There's no simple rule, even no complex formula to calculate this. Every bank applies different rules. Look at the mortgages webinar. I talk a lot about that there. If you, as an international buyer, if you live in Spain, if you're a resident here, if you pay taxes here, and you have a job, you have an income, you have some savings, probably the bank will ask you a down payment of 20% of the purchase price of your property. If you buy the property to live yourself, if you buy the property as an investment, they might ask you 30% of the purchase price as a down payment, because it's not to live, it's an investment, a bit more risky. If you're non-resident, so if you're, for instance, living in the US or another part of the world, the banks might ask you 40%. If you have special type of work contracts, it might be different, the percentage. So it's diverse. We equally see people that they can finance 90% of the property, of the purchase price, sometimes 100%. For instance, if you own another property already and that's debt free, then the bank might say, well, actually, you don't need to put any money into the transaction. We finance 100%. The mortgage is a first step we do. It's something I do directly myself with our buyers. We do a meeting, a little workshop. We understand the financial profile of our buyers, and then I built a case, as a picture of that person, and I talk to my contacts at the banks, and then we request simulations that I think I define scenarios I want to see for this type of buyer. That's what we do with the banks as a very first step. Okay. If I'm paid in the UK, what documents will Spanish bank require to determine whether to approve a mortgage? Letter for the employer, foreign tax documents. What if I'm an owner of a foreign company and I don't have a salary? That is an example of specific situations. All banks will require your last year's tax declaration. So 2019 or maybe 2020 today, depends. They will ask a copy of your work contract if you have that. If it's a temporary work contract, it's difficult or nearly impossible. So then I think you need to wait a bit longer. And then they will request you a proof of income and expenses. So how healthy is your situation? So that means a bank an extract of your bank, the balance of your bank account or bank accounts, information about other assets you might have, stock on the market, a pension plan, other properties, other debt you might have, a debt for student debt or car you might have bought with a mortgage, etc. They wanted that type of information. If you own a company and you don't have a salary, it's more complicated. Certainly, it's complicated if you are in Spain. It's more complicated when you're non-resident, because for the bank there's more risk involved. What if you don't pay back? If you're the sole company owner, it makes things easier. We've done something recently 2 weeks ago for someone who bought in Castelldefels, close to Barcelona. He's the sole owner He has 100% of the shares of his own company, and therefore it worked out. But banks don't like to finance a company. They like to finance individuals. So to get financing as a company is very, very difficult. So yes, you can be as yourself. The bank might want you to be a personal guarantor for the mortgage to a company, but it's difficult to do that. You might, in such case, consider taking a mortgage in your home country, which might be easier than getting it in Spain. But again, it's part of the simulations to look at and see what is possible.
Can we do the last poll first, Raf?
Yes, of course. Let's do this. Is one more poll we would like to launch. Yeah, it's a very simple one, but it's very important for us. And you would like to know how inspiring you find this. You found this session. We put a lot of time in it, and we try and think up front what is relevant to people like yourself, and that's how we built the content. So there's you should see a pop-up message on the screen now. If you could share your feedback with us. This is the last poll. Yeah, this is the last poll, right? So you can still give some. You can still vote if you. We can leave this open for a second. I continue with the questions here. There's a question: do you have to declare other properties in other countries? That's a general question and depends on your situation. Depends if you're resident or non-resident here. What we normally do with people who own properties or assets in other countries is a tax exercise, typically upfront, to see what the implications are of buying the property in Spain, and what obligations you have, fiscal obligations you have in Spain or in your home country. There is typically, not typically, but many countries, there are agreements to avoid double taxing. But again, it depends on, it's very specific, depends on the situation. What is typically used to negotiate interest rate for a mortgage with bank, tin or Thai? It's a bit more complex than this. When you look at mortgages, there is, because some banks even manage to include costs in a mortgage outside the Thai. Thai should include all other costs, and we've seen cases where even big banks try and hide costs for their buyers. You've got to look with the mortgage, you've got to look at the full pack and see. I think first of all, in your situation, what is important? Are you very cost sensitive, and therefore do you want the cheapest mortgage, the cheapest rates, the cheapest conditions, the cheapest other products the banks want to or request you to buy? Or do you say it doesn't have to be the cheapest, it just needs to be a good deal, but also value service, and I want to make sure that things are okay, etc. So that's the first question. Because some banks there's banks that are fairly unknown, but they're very aggressive in their pricing and their offers for mortgages. But you need to talk to them through a help desk center, right? So you can't just pick up the phone and call your account manager. You can't. So that is one thing. Then how do you to negotiate the mortgage? It's not just the interest rate, because that's the banks try and they're good at it. They make it very confusing, very hard to compare between banks, because you have an interest rate which can be fixed, variable, or mixed. So partially fixed and then a few years variable. You have setup fees, opening costs for a mortgage. You have potentially a life insurance they want you to buy. You have a property insurance, which is mandatory by law. You have banks might require you to have their salary or your salary deposited into a bank account with that bank. They might require you to use a credit or debit card at least X times a year. There might be penalties, meaning costs, in case you pay back part of your mortgage earlier So you get a bonus next year, you get 10,000 euros, you want to pay back your mortgage. Some banks charge you a cost for that. Other banks don't. Other banks do it only in the first years and not afterwards. So there's a lot of parameters that are, for me, critical to take into account, which are, some are mathematical. You can do numbers with them, but also you need to also run scenarios, because the banks that come with the cheapest interest rates, they typically ask you for life insurance, which depending on your age can be several hundred euros per year. 700 meaning 200-300 if you're very young, and 500-600 or more if you're in your 50s or so, or late 40s. So be very careful with that. But you also need to run a simulation where you say, what if I pay back early? Because some of these fixed costs, they are one-off fixed in the beginning. So if you pay back early, if you think you'll make more money, you have capacity for saving money, they penalize you, and they might hit you quite hard on the cost side. So, but tin is easier to look at than TIE, in combination with all the other factors that I've just discussed. Okay, because TIE alone is, I think it can be misleading. Okay, need to go. Thanks a lot. Okay, so I don't see more questions, but if anyone still has questions, don't be shy, as Victor said in the beginning, and otherwise, write them to me if they are specific, if they're personal, if they are financial. I can understand you don't want to share all your questions in the group here, so an email or just follow us if you want to stay connected. Thank you very much for your. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you found it inspiring, and helps you take better decisions or be better prepared for the search.
Raf, if I may, I just wanted to remind people that how often are you doing these?
Yes. So so the next, there you go. So there's another webinar coming in. It's typically more or less monthly, but not exactly every month. So we've done 7 now. I think we started in September, October last year. 7 in English. I've done in other languages as well. The next one is coming in April. It's about renovations. In the market today, there's a lot of opportunities to buy properties that need a bit of an upgrade, and people doubt if it's good to do, if it's worth doing it, how much the upgrade cost would be, but also how they pay for it. So that's coming then. April 20th, I'm going to talk in a session specifically about what we do as a company. I give examples of what we do in these webinars, but that's where I really talk about what service we offer and how it works. But again, if you want to know that, just drop us an email. We don't need to wait till April. And there's really more webinars coming after April as well. So typically 1 per month on different topics.
And of course, people, don't be shy. Please put your comments on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and thank you very much, Raf, and Inspire Property Experts, the whole team. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them to Barcelona Metropolitan, and we will funnel them over to Raf if we see those as well.
For those of you who don't know Metropolitan is the #1 magazine and I think source of information for international people looking at historically Barcelona, but Metropolitan is also expanding beyond Barcelona. But it's a very, very good source for a lot of expats or international related questions. Anything from health insurance, property, through schooling, and all these things that you probably have in mind or have gone through or might need to go through when you buy in Spain, or when you live in Spain. Sorry. Okay, if no more questions, we're going to close the session here. Thanks a lot, everyone, for your patience, for your questions, for your participation, and be in touch. I hope to see you again in the future. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Nicely done, as usual.